The world of football is essentially a cruel cycle of glory and decay. There are empires that take decades to build but collapse in just 10 short days. For the German national team, the journey at the 2018 World Cup was not just a failure in professional terms, but a torment of the soul. It was where the definition of the Panzer, a symbol of stubborn discipline and overwhelming power, was crushed by the very conservatism and excessive pride of those involved. The tragedy in Russia that year for Die Mannschaft was not entirely accidental. We must look at the reality of Germany following the magical Maracanã of 2014. When Philipp Lahm lifted the golden trophy under the brilliant fireworks in Brazil, the whole world believed that Joachim Löw had found an eternal winning formula. Germany then was a perfect blend of traditional steel and the elegance of modern football. They had the coldness of Schweinsteiger, the cunning of Müller, and the genius vision of Mesut Ozil. But glory often comes with an invisible trap called complacency. Joachim Löw, the great architect, unintentionally became a conservative king within the very castle he built. He clung to the veterans, the ones who had brought him the throne, and a style of play that was gradually being left behind by the breath of time. Germany entered the summer of Russia 2018 with a roster that any coach would envy. In Joachim Löw's hands were Manuel Neuer, the world's #1 goalkeeper returning from a long-term injury, the steel center-back duo of Mats Hummels and Jerome Boateng, and the brain, Toni Kroos, at the peak of his form after a Champions League treble with Real Madrid. Up front were legendary names like Thomas Müller, Mesut Ozil, Sami Khedira, or Mario Gomez. Theoretically, it was still a world-class collective, a gathering of seasoned champions. However, that polished exterior was merely a shell for a machine that had become rickety and dry from the inside. The quality of the German national team's play under Löw after 2014 began to show signs of degeneration into an extreme and dull state. They were no longer a tank crushing every obstacle with direct power or sharp, razor-like counterattacks. Instead, Joachim Löw wanted Germany to play a brand of absolute possession football, a German version of tiki-taka, but lacking the sharpness and speed to transition when necessary. German players passed the ball a lot, held it for a long time, but those were harmless sideways passes, lacking breakthrough potential. They became slow, predictable, and especially fragile against simple counterattacks from opponents. The confidence of champions turned into subjectivity as they lost the killer instinct that once terrified the world. The nightmare truly began on June 17th at the Luzhniki Stadium in Moscow. The opening match against Mexico exposed all the deep gashes in Joachim Löw's machine. From the very first minutes, people saw a German team pushing their lineup high recklessly, almost forgetting basic defensive duties. They played with a strange arrogance, as if believing the opponent would surrender to the massive shadow of the defending champions. But Mexico was not afraid. They had Hirving Lozano and Carlos Vela, speedy drills ready to pierce through Germany's slow defense. In the 35th minute, a textbook counterattack by Mexico made the Luzhniki Stadium explode. Chicharito passed to Lozano. This player had a cutback move that eliminated Mesut Ozil, who was retreating to defend in vain, before firing past Manuel Neuer. That lone goal was not just a score, it was a heavy blow to German pride. Throughout the remaining time, Germany held 60% possession and unleashed dozens of shots, but all fell into despair. Müller's runs became out of sync, Ozil's passes lacked breakthrough, and the defense with Hummels and Boateng suddenly became unusually slow against the speed of Mexico's ghosts. The 0-1 loss was not just a disappointing result, it was the first warning of a chain reaction collapse that no one at the German training camp dared to face seriously. By the second match against Sweden in Sochi, the Germans stood on the brink of elimination after just 2 rounds. It was a match that epitomized the deadlock of a declining empire that still had a few sparks of individual character left. Germany entered with a nothing-to-lose mindset, but the old script repeated itself. Defensive lapses cost them a goal after a delicate finish by Ola Toivonen in the first half. Throughout the second half, Germany pressed forward in desperation. Marco Reus equalized early in the second half, sparking a glimmer of hope. However, the psychological pressure was immense as they played a man down after Boateng received a second yellow card in the 82nd minute. In the darkest moments, as the clock ticked to 90 and the world thought of an early farewell for the Kings, Toni Kroos appeared to fulfill a historic mission. A free kick from a tight angle, a magnificent trajectory that flew straight into the far corner of Sweden's goal. That goal was like a revival drug, a moment of individual brilliance saving the champion's honor. However, the wild celebrations of Joachim Löw and his players after the match unintentionally masked a grim truth. Germany had won thanks to a moment of individual genius, not a convincing collective play. They still played laboriously, were still easily penetrated, and still lacked the cohesion of a unified collective. That victory was only a temporary oxygen tank for a dying patient. And then on June 27, 2018, Kazan became the apocalypse for German football. The opponent was only a South Korea that had almost no hope of moving forward. But what happened on the pitch was a humiliation that German football history will recall in pain. Never before had people seen a German team so dilapidated, weak, and lifeless. They entered the match as superiors, but played with leaden feet. The passes from Toni Kroos, Khedira, or Ozil in this match became soulless and mechanical. They besieged the goal continuously, but had no sharp plan to break through the disciplined defense of the Koreans. Time passed in the extreme impatience of Joachim Löw. Substitutions like Thomas Müller or Mario Gomez could not make a difference. The stubborn confidence of the past was now replaced by anxious faces, vacant stares, and trembling feet every time they touched the ball. The peak of cruelty came in stoppage time when the tragedy reached its climax. In the 90+2 minute, from a corner kick, Toni Kroos, the symbol of precision, made a disastrously wrong pass right in front of his own penalty area. The ball hit his foot and found Kim Young-won standing unmarked, who shook Neuer's net. The referee initially signaled offside, but after consulting VAR, the goal was confirmed. The world was stunned. Germany was aghast and collapsed. But the tragedy did not stop there. In desperation and loss of control, Manuel Neuer abandoned his goal to join the attack, like a winger deep in the opponent's half, an image reflecting the chaos of the entire system. The ball was stolen from Neuer's feet, followed by a long ball from a Korean player towards Son Heung-min, who was sprinting like a wind-tearing arrow. Son Heung-min pushed the ball into the empty net before the helplessness of millions of German fans. The score was 2-1. The image of Son celebrating while the German players stood stunned, Hummels bowing his head on the grass, and Thomas Müller looking into space vacantly was the clearest focal point of an empire's collapse. It was ultimate deadlock, complete helplessness, and a blanket of hopelessness covering Kazan. For the first time in 80 years, Germany was eliminated from the World Cup group stage, and more bitterly, they left as the bottom team in the group. The death of the Panzer in Russia was not a random accident. It was the inevitable result of a process of decline that Joachim Löw failed to recognize and intentionally ignored. He trusted too much in old, outdated formulas, favored old players who were satiated with glory, and lost the desire for innovation. Players who were heroes in 2014 now stepped onto the field with heavy legs. They lacked the fire of battle, the steel discipline, and the stubbornness that was the specialty of German football. That decline was not just in the numbers, but in the fighting spirit eroded by complacency. Looking back at that journey of failure, many still feel a lingering sadness, pity for a talented generation of Toni Kroos, Thomas Müller, and Manuel Neuer, who had to leave the tournament in the most painful and humiliating way. But more than regret is a costly lesson about the constant movement of top-tier football. No dynasty is eternal if it stops moving and renewing itself. The soulless shots, the misplaced passes, and the tears at Kazan were the end of a glorious but bitter era for German football. If 2014 was the peak of perfection and unity, 2018 was the abyss of conservatism and decay. Germany stepped down from the throne not because the opponent was too strong, but because they had lost themselves before the tournament even began. The image of Manuel Neuer losing the ball in midfield and Son Heung-min scoring into an empty net will forever be a large scar. A reminder that even the most powerful empires can collapse entirely if they forget how to keep their engines lubricated with humility and the hunger to fight. It is a sad elegy for a mistimed Panzer, a lesson about the ups and downs of destiny that anyone who loves the white and black colors must take to heart with a lingering pain. An empire has perished, not in the sound of roaring gunfire, but in a sigh of absolute helplessness. If this story changes the way you look at the fallen giants of the pitch, please subscribe and like our channel. We are excavating the history they tried to bury. Let's plant the seeds for the future. The next treasure will soon be revealed.